Yeah, I think we need to find an easier way of doing this podcast, but we'll talk about that offline. Back to our football chat about how it's interesting how Wales want to change, or the Welsh FA wants to change its name to Cymru. And we're basically saying how it's interesting. I've sort of half mind blanked on what we're finding interesting all about it. I just committed to it.
I like it when this is a tactic, right? You say, "Oh, not sure," and basically you say "not sure" in a buffer to be like, "But I actually think that this is this." Like you'll say some buffer word or buffer phrase to get it going.
Really?
Yeah. So Wales are going to change to be known internationally as Cymru. Now Turkey have done the same. They've want to be
Cymru as well. That's all.
no, yeah. We're fighting for the word Cymru now, so you have to vote to whichever country actually wins the word. They've done it so they're now pronounced in the Turkish way to write Turkey is their standard global name, which is beneficial. It makes sense because, again, if you Google Turkey in the English spelling, it comes up with turkeys, right? Like the meat, the bird kind of thing. And in the same way for us, I don't think when you Google Wales, it does come up with actual mammals, right? The whales. It does come up with the country Wales, but I think switching it to Cymru would be even better. I'm not so bothered about it because I'm kind of like, oh, it's just the English and the Welsh. But I understand that the English definition of Wales is basically like foreigners, right? So in us being able to use Cymru is a better, more kind of like our own onus of that name. But yeah, tell me about the. So you've been watching the Welsh podcast. No, you've been watching the Welsh documentary about the Welsh Football Club. The Welsh team.
Well, the Welsh team, yeah, about talking about how John Toshack basically was saying how he wanted to take the Welsh football team to a tournament, so basically Euros or World Cup or both, preferably multiple ones. I'm assuming he'd want to take at least one of each, if not multiple reoccurring times. Back when I was a lot younger, so probably didn't understand the tactics or the managerial point of view back then. But I remember just every time I watched Wales play, they either played pretty poor or they lost a lot of games. And I think it's interesting because he's the guy that's basically introduced Gareth Bale, I think potentially Ramsey, definitely Hennessy, Gunter.
How did he introduce that?
So he basically, this is me botching up all the documentary, but he's basically taking people that were under 17s and pushing them to skipping the under 19s or whatever, pushing them to under 21s and then straight into the senior squad.
Because they had some cap, right?
Yeah, he was basically pushing them to get their cap way sooner so they could get used to the stature of wearing the badge for Wales, being in the different qualifying stages, what the pressure might bring with that. So I'm assuming these players might have not even been Premier League regulars, maybe bench, maybe even Championship. At a guess at that age.
Because they also had a cap in or like a threshold of like 27-year-olds.
Yeah, so the average age was, I think, 27, 28, and Toshack was like, we need to get it down to 23. And I think it's interesting because average age, you just assume, well, everyone's that age. Well, it's you've got the 18s that are pulling down maybe the 32-year-olds, but overall the stock are then 21 to 25 of the group, basically. So when Toshack was playing, a lot of people were. It sounded like he was changing this, even though he's a very traditional manager, he was trying to change the system, so play with a back three instead of the classic 4-4-2 that pretty much every team in the world was probably playing back then. So he was trying to do stuff in a very innovative way. And he was even saying to like some of his staff how basically he will be doing decisions and he will be creating an impact that they won't feel the accolade, is that the right word? The celebration from it. Someone else will reap the fruits of basically his hard labour. So it's interesting seeing like the amount of memories that like Gareth Bale or Robson Carnu or whatever has done for like I remember where I was watching those games, hyper mode, like you have a stamp in your memory just for that, just because Toshack was trying to get loads of youngsters in, but also he was asking loads of people of like what their um, background was, what their link was. So he basically got the Ashley Williams. He found out that he had a link with Wales, not only with Jamaican but Wales as well. So roped him in. That then ended up becoming the captain. Robson Carnu, apparently he used to do trips to Wales to pick up his, I think it was his nana or nine or whatever he says, grandma or whatever, to then go, what's it called? Not camping. What's the next one up from that?
Glamping.
Next one up from that.
Caravanning.
Yeah, so it was probably caravan then glamping, probably. But
yeah, that's true. Yeah. Although glamping is still outside, like there's just like a fancier tent.
Yeah. So you used to do a lot of camping, and they were like, "Oh, so did your mother move to Wales? Because obviously that doesn't count." He's like, "No, grandmother was born in Wales." So it's like it was a clever way of how do we blood youngsters to get used to high level pressure, but also how do we cast a net to all the people that we might not have come across before, with like mothers, grandmothers, dogs that are born in Wales or whatever, that you can link them to it to then, because once you've got that, they did amazing, good as semi-finals. They played against Portugal, lost. They came back to Wales and they basically did a city tour around Cardiff with swarms of people, as if they've won the Champions League, the World Cup, whatever. But it was just a celebration of, wow, like this is the new Wales team. Like we never thought that they would be that good this soon on. I think there's always a hope that they would be that good and a hope that they would be as good as the rugby team, but there was never really that. And I think that tournament in France, that Euros, it's like a lot of the kids now that are playing in the team remembered where they were when they were watching it. So it's an interesting sort of legacy of sort of Toshack had an idea, implemented it, loads of people didn't like, but then Gary Speed took over and then he realised the limitations, but instead of looking at the limitations that you can't buy players on an international level, he was saying, how do we professionalise the training grounds, the staff, the travel? How do we make it as if they are like playing at the top of their game? Because if we can create this structure that makes you feel like you're Brazil or Portugal or whatever, that you should be playing at that level, like it raises up the stakes of, right, I need to take this more seriously. Plus it helps you because maybe you're eating healthy or whatever. So it's interesting seeing Gary Speed come in with his ideas of going, okay, there's limitations, but what do I have control over? And then how do I push that to the nth degree with obviously his stamp? To then Coleman coming in to be like, it's really weird because obviously Gary Speed passed away very early on. So Coleman was trying to, I think he didn't realise, but he was trying to mirror what Gary Speed did. But Chris Coleman is completely different. So I think he had to sort of basically, he sat in a dark room when they lost really badly and was like, actually, I either need to leave because I'm trying to copy him, or I need to leave for doing like bad results, but I need to at least try to do results how I would do it because that's all I have control over, basically. And that's when he started to win games and stuff. So it is interesting, and I've not fully finished it. It's on S4C and it's Winglish, so it's got Gareth Bale like speaking English, but it's obviously got like the Scoria people speaking Welsh, and it is a mixture depending on some of the players can speak Welsh, some can speak English. So it is quite interesting seeing the different bits. Obviously, Giggs came in, and it's at that section, so it's not moved over to Rob Page and qualifying for World Cup.
It's like going through the history. I think so. That was a really good summary. I think two things that come out to me in you sharing that is Coleman thinking that he should emulate somebody to be successful versus being himself. And I love that pivot moment of he realized that he can't be the best Gary Speed. Gary Speed obviously has sadly passed away. Like, Gary Speed can be the best Gary Speed, and Coleman can be the best Coleman. So I think in life, are you trying to emulate someone? It kind of comes back to what we were speaking about before around like your beliefs. Has somebody said, oh, like, you're as skillful as your sibling, your brother, or oh, your cousin's like, oh, you're very similar to your cousin, or you're very similar to your twin, right? Like, we have twins in the family, so we know some of the pressures of that as well, like the natural competitive / comparison, and then it makes you basically just not be as good because you're trying to be something else, or you're trying to do something to achieve somebody else's perception of you. Oh, well, I always thought you were really good at drumming. Okay, that means I'm going to have to try harder. But actually, I love business too. You know, so then I'll be trying to be this greatest drummer ever when really I like both things, and trying to be somebody else, like where you fit into somebody else's life. They might be like, hey, I want a drummer right now. So Dan, be the best drummer because that's what I want. They're not expressing that, but that's how they convey their encouragement, is to kind of like, I encourage you because I want you basically to fit into my jigsaw piece. And so sometimes we have to just realize, like, are we actually being ourselves in our situation, or are we trying to be somebody else? Because the best Tom Ryland is Tom Ryland. The best Dan Ryland is Dan Ryland. The second point that you were making about just basically instilling some sort of a process or legacy of process, which in its infancy is basically going to look like a bad decision. So you'll have a bunch of people that turn up on a day to be like, this was a really poor game. And they don't realize that this poor game is the journey of trialing something new, which is bringing down that average age, which is bringing in youngsters, getting them to experience international football sooner, so then they can basically adapt quicker rather than waiting a long time for them to be like mature in the kind of like the international game and stuff. So I bet that must have been really annoying, because again, you have to just basically take for granted right now that 20% of the people that you will ever meet will not like you. And that's a
healthy percentage.
Yeah, let's pretend that that's a fact, right? 20% of the people that you'll meet in this world will not like you. But is it important to try and squeeze that 20% to be zero? Or is it better to focus on the fact that 80% believe in you? So I would say, like, what stopped Toshack from like changing his mind? Chances are, one, he really truly believed in what he was doing for himself. So his self-confidence in the idea was huge. And two, he probably surrounded himself with the 80%. With the 80% of like, yeah, that's a great idea. And of course, you can't not encounter the 20%. But, you know, that shouldn't make you pivot and filter falter on that concept. And I think those decisions, it reminds me of, I was listening to there's a book about the All Blacks, how they basically hand over their shirts to the next player in this kind of like legacy of like, I want you to now make this shirt better than I made that shirt. And there is so much of that legacy of handing it over. How do you hand over greatness through generations? Another thing that they did that I found interesting was they always wanted to keep players in a stressful, like kind of on a stressful edge so they can think with clarity. Because when they're on the field, stress happens. You need to think with clarity. So what they would do is like, right, tomorrow you're giving a speech about, you know, I don't know, some topic that you could give speeches about. Like tomorrow you're going to give speeches about stretching. Like they would do a speech about like the best stretches and how to like warm up or whatever. And while they're doing that speech, we're basically going to throw stuff at you. You know, like we're not going to tell you that we're going to throw stuff at you, but we're going to throw stuff at you. You know, keeping you in that heightened sense of alert or like stress, then is when you then come to the moment when it needs to happen, aka on the pitch, and you're losing and you need to be like, come on, think with clarity in a stressful situation. You're able to switch into the clarity much better because you've basically trained in uncertainty, in stress. Therefore, when the moment comes, you deal with it slightly better than you would if you hadn't prepared in that way. And I think like that's a really interesting thing. Are we like challenging ourselves when I know this analogy is poor due to the world circumstances, but you basically don't wait for war to happen. You kind of like prepare for war to happen. And if we specifically kind of target that to mindset, right? Like you don't like wait for stress to happen to be ready. You prepare yourself before the stress happens. And I think it is about what can you do now to prepare yourself for those moments. And it's not living in fear of those moments. It's like just recognizing those things happen. You know, stress happens and difficult situations happen. So what can you do to prepare yourself so you then act in a better way when it does hit you, when it does happen?
And I think to caveat it, with everyone that's listening that might already be in a stressful situation, it's like, how do you pull the pressure so you can get a little bit more clarity? Or how do you be with people that are going to walk through that storm of your life? Because it might be a season or whatever, that then you can go again. Because it's one of those things, you might be preparing, or you might be in it, or it might be post of I did that wrong and did that poorly, or whatever. So I think it's just to reiterate that you might be in a stressful situation now, and you need resources of how do you enjoy the moment, how do you sort of grab the bull by its horns type of mentality, because it's so easy to mentally clock out or be overwhelmed, binge Netflix, go through a season that you're sort of basically drifting downstream to potentially a cliff that then takes you into a deeper area, rather than going, actually, I'm really struggling now, I need to open up to friends or colleagues or whatever, just to relieve a little bit of pressure. You don't need to full on open the sort of faucet completely. Like, I'll be vulnerable with the topic at the moment that I've not double checked with my wife. But anyway, so we've had some bad news from an uncle, and what I told my wife is, I was saying, let people at school know, because you might randomly break down crying, or you might randomly not be able to think, because right now in your brain you're processing information that is bad, sad news that might genuinely affect your day-to-day life. Because what I learned from my past is, when people passed away, or if I had bad news about something, I would not tell people, because I'd be like, I don't want them to change how they treat me. But actually, sometimes by giving people heads up, because they're humans and they can't mind read ourselves, it's that if you randomly break down, it's something happened, you've had sad news, you might randomly break down. It's not your characteristic, it's not the person of who you are, it's not you're a weak person or whatever that you're tarnished with. It's a very specific crunch moment right now. Something might happen. I'm just giving you a heads up so you don't randomly have a go at me for being upset, or having a go to dropping the ball when you might not necessarily be thinking straight. So then they can do better decisions, if it's leadership or her boss or whatever, of managing that situation, that you're letting them know what's going on. Obviously, you don't need to go super specific of like how much you've been crying, or how much you've been processing, or how much you like whatever. It's just going, something bad's happened. It might affect my attitude. It's basically for someone to have that in their brain, that they've had sad news, they might get triggered on a certain topic or in certain situations. How do I support them in this situation? Plus, on the flip side, if people are shitty, the fact that you've told them or treat you differently, then it's just highlighting the fact of who are for you and who are against you.
So and told them you've told them early, so then you can figure out, okay, so when I am really in a even higher stress situation, then that's the person not to have around. Exactly. So I think, yeah, I completely agree. You basically have to preemptively make decisions and do stuff before it's like quote unquote too late, of like the stress of the enormity of the scale of something hits you, by decreasing the pressure everywhere you physically possibly can, in a hope that if you, as you said, leak out like 5%, 10%, you've built back that capacity again. And it's like a kettle boiling over. Like basically, just before it boils over, if we're talking about an old school kettle, right, you pull it off the stove, right? You you pull it off so it doesn't boil. You wait for a bit, then you put it back on, then you pull it off, and it's like the imagery of that. What does that look like? And I completely agree. It's about telling people up front, some information. You don't have to, as you said, don't have to share it all. Some information to let them know before it comes as a random out of the blue text that's like, hey, this is an immediate, urgent thing. And obviously those things still happen anyway, right? So it's like, how can you build capacity for basically hard times and create an environment of people that can assist you in that hard time because they're aware that you're going through a hard time, and not being like, why were you late to work today? And you'd be like, well, actually I had a really tough time getting the kids ready or something, like those moments still happen anyway. But if you can kind of preempt some of that stuff, I think it's ultimately because we think when we tell people our problems, we think that instantly becomes their problem, but it doesn't. Like, it's up to them to do with that information what they want. So, for example, they might be like, "Oh, I feel really heavy about the fact that you've told me this news." Like, but that's not up to you. Like,
plus you could always caveat it to say, "I don't want you to fix it, but I'm just letting you know." So then it empowers other people to know that they don't need to do anything. It's just more information that if something randomly happens, it just helps them know how to deal with that situation.
Let me chime in with this. That just triggered my memory to something called the 5 listening ears. Again, you guys know now that we like psychology and stuff. There are 5, and I'm not going to...
We're not a professional, so don't take this.
Yeah, this is not medical advice. Yeah. Caveat. I think that should be our t-shirt. Caveat. Basically, there's 5 there's 5 kind of like things you do when somebody tells you something, and I don't remember all of the 5, but you can Google it. And some of the 5 is like one of it could be statement. So I'm just saying I'm sad. Is that a statement? The second one is it a request? I'm sad, like, and therefore, do you want me to do something? So it is a case of, I can't remember the other 3, annoyingly.
Is it a question, maybe?
Yeah, I can't remember.
People ask rhetorical questions, but actually they don't need an answer.
Yeah,
maybe we can guess what the others are.
I'll have to find what it is. But broadly speaking, even just knowing those 2, of like, is it a request for me to do something, or is it just a statement? And especially when it comes to any sort of relationship, kind of like a romantic relationship, like a husband-wife or a boyfriend-girlfriend, those 2 ears are really good to distinguish between.
Yeah.
Let me Google 5 listening ears so I can tell you exactly what it is. Oh, it's not going to be 5 listening ears.
You can tell this is not a planned conversation.
Oh, this is coming up with all sorts of different wrong things. Well, anyway, 2 of them are statement and request, I think. But yeah, I think
if it isn't, we'll start it now.
Yeah, we've just decreased it. The 2 listening ears. Is it a statement or is it a request? And I 100% think that, like, if we're able to give that context to remove uncertainty of the person listening, so it just delivers a smoother thing. And of course, we're not always going to be able to do that. But if you can, let's say, hey, FYI, like, this family situation is going, I'm just telling you for context, I don't need anything right now. And if that changes, I'll let you know. But I just wanted to let you know as context. And I appreciate you letting me tell you, kind of thing, or listening.
Because then it just saves a future potential blowout in an emotional triggered state that you might not be able to fix ever, or you might lose a job, or you might break off with a partner or whatever, because you've not told them that there's this dripping thing that's been annoying you for years or whatever. By even just saying there's this thing, I know it's on my side, the element of like responsibility, it's not on you, but this is what I'm dealing with, massively helps people to know, okay, that I can maybe think how I say something, or I think how I might not be so demanding maybe in this short period of time because people are people at the end of the day.
Yeah. I've just Googled the 5 listening ears psychology, and it's like the 5 levels of listening: ignoring, pretending. So it's not that. It's not the 5 levels. It's like, as you hear something, you will hear it and basically interpret it in these in one of these 5 ways. So when someone tells you I am sad, Tom will interpret it in one of these 5 ways. He might be like, oh, Dan's just saying it as a statement. Whereas I might have said it in the hope that Tom basically does something, basically.
Yeah.
So, yeah. It's really interesting. And I think all sorts of... I've been thinking more and more about politics and being a public leader, or being like a country leader or a politician and all this stuff. And of course, we all have our opinions and the things that we definitely disagree with, more than agree with. And it's like, if you want to be somebody that that does change at that level, which is like policy changes is one of the best levels to make changes at, because it's long lasting, unless it's then reverted in the next 10 years. But like, how do you put up with that 20% of people hating you? And it's quite difficult to do that. So what people typically do is like, okay, I won't go into politics to make changes at that level. And we all know the significance of those people, because those people can choose to up our taxes or lower our taxes. So they have a lot of power, but it's very difficult to become those people. So therefore we decide to run businesses where we can control the ecosystem, or, well, within reason, or we decide to run charities so we can have that impact. And I find it really difficult to like figure out, do I want to go down that road? Do I not want to go down that road? Do I prefer to be like on the edge and be able to like facilitate my own impact through my own means? All because I'm afraid of people hating me. I'm afraid of that 20%, because that 20% can be pretty intense, all the way up to death threats, right? So it's like, I'm not saying of the politicians today, but like the kind of person that I would be is like trying to do good, right? And I know that everybody says that, but I hope that I would bring a different thing. And I've been watching something on Channel 4 called The Alternative Prime Minister, or I Want to Be a Prime Minister, or something like that. And that's really fascinating, because these people that want to do good and that are not going to compromise on character and stuff, when a stressful situation comes of like they're faking that we're under a cybersecurity, what do? Do we basically put all of our resources into finding out who's done the cybersecurity thing so we can stop them? Or do we do this thing over here? And it's always about the compromise and stuff. And then it like escalated to be like, okay, so basically to stop this, we've now figured out where the cybersecurity is. It's in this country over here. So do we send a SWAT team in to destroy it? Or do we basically do a Tomahawk missile? And basically the people in the thing were like, do the missile kind of thing. And what happens is like, as soon as they've done the missile, like the person of that country is like, hey, we've just seen that there's a missile going in, what's going up? And you rupture this thing. And the escalation of all that stuff is just like a different challenge. And what happened, one of the mistakes was like, they lied to the representative of that country, like, oh no, we're just doing this, kind of thing, or whatever, in one aspect of it. And they were like, as soon as you've done that, you've lost it. It's better to be truthful, because ultimately when you create a lie, you then have to fulfill or keep that going. So it'll be like nth degree. So they were like, I think at one point it was like, one of our submarines has gone into French waters, and we've lost connection with them. And the reason why they were in French waters is because they were surveilling a couple of boats, wherever. So it's like, what do we do? Do we go in secretly, or do we go in publicly? And basically they did it like secretly, and then the French were on the phone, and then they pick it. So it's like this reenactment to these like average Joe normal people that then have to be like tested to do this thing. And I found it really interesting. But they would say, no, we don't compromise, right? We don't compromise. Integrity is really important. But then you just lied to say, oh, we didn't realize, whatever. So it's like, under those stressful situations, and I'm not saying that we should therefore be more chill with certain behaviors. I'm just saying, like, actually, it's really difficult. Could I do this? Like, would I struggle to do this? And more so, like, just frame it in me and whether or not I wanted to do like public office type stuff.
It's like brainstorming the process.
Yeah, I've also started to think about, unfortunately, war is knocking on like Ukraine's like door for sure. Like all that atrocities that are happening there, as well as like Europe, as well as the wars that were happening before Ukraine kicking off, and how, as a person that doesn't really like war, but I appreciate that there needs to be deterrence. But it's like a really muddy like world of stuff. So lots of people go into defense because, one, it's where the government spends the most consistent money, and two, it's more so they go into defense because it's actually a deterrent, and they would build stuff as defensive mechanisms rather than attacking mechanisms. Or like, well, now that we've got this, you basically won't attack us. So I'm finding that interesting, and I guess the reason why I'm thinking some of this stuff is because, yes, it's always been around, and it's always been something that humanity has had to deal with and still dealing with. But also, if Wales became an independent country, or Cymru, as we would now say, if Cymru became an independent country, how would we operate that, right?
To get the full loop background.
Yeah. Like, okay, tomorrow you become the Prime Minister of Cymru. What's your defense strategy? So again, the reason why I'm watching all this politics stuff, because I'm just like, it's just food for thought, and I guess it's just like challenging me and pushing out my brain a little bit further than what I've kind of kept it to be. Because I'm interested in like
Chester, if that was the case, because don't they still have a rule that you can bow and arrow a Welsh person or something random?
Isn't it like 1 a.m. in the morning or something? If a Welsh person's walking over, like you can kill them with a bow and arrow or something. But yeah, and this is it. You have to think of all the policies that you have. So international trade, energy, like everything. So one of those is crime, like infrastructure. Like one of those is the international, or like basically defense. So what's your plan? What are you going to do to make sure that you're not taken advantage of, but also not basically taking advantage of others? So it's very, very interesting. And I think, just to add as well, I think it's very interesting that all of a sudden more people are interested in the impact of war because it's coming closer to home, and we've never really thought about that because it's always been over there, those people over there. And I think detachment is the easiest way to get away with a bunch of bad stuff. So I recognize that that's something that I hope people are kind of wrestling with, to be like, we should have always been against war, not just because it's people that look like us now, and that stuff.
Yeah.
But that's a discussion for another time. So yeah. What's the summary of what we've just spoken about? We've spoken about tons of stuff, but what's the encapsulated?
What is your emotional and mental deterrent?
Yeah. What's your management of like high stress situations?
Yeah. Stress and pain management.
Yeah.
How do you deal with it?
Yeah.
Is it good?
One great way to manage stress is hammer those nails.